Hello everyone, good morning again. It's me Noemi Grifon, and today I am going to discuss what I have learned on chapter 1. So, classroom assessment, principles and practice that enhance student learning and motivation. So, in chapter 1, we tackle about summative assessment, planning and implementing. So, the topic that I chose, which I have learned a lot, is number and length of assessment. So, in a classroom test, you need to determine how many separate assessments will be given and how long each one will be. So, there are several factors to consider. These are the age of the students, the length of classes, and the types of question. So, the time allocated for the assessment should be sufficient for all students to answer all the questions within reason. So, there are certain rules of thumb for preparing a unit test. 5 to 10 items per learning target. So, example for that is, for student will identify the location of 25 ancient cities in a map. So, it would be reasonable to ask for 5 to 10 or out of 25. So, you must just select them randomly. So normally, something will be purposeful so a good cross-section is selected. So the more learning targets as few as 3 items are sufficient. So there are many short assessment can provide the same, if not better, information than a single long assessment. Then length should be determined first without regard to the number. So, this will help to determine how many are required for a representative sample of the domain. So, begin constructing and assessment before a unit begins. Otherwise, there may not be sufficient time to administer a test that meets high quality criteria. So, the age of student, of course, the length of classes, the length of time are very important consideration. Example for that, in a first grade, student summative assessment usually lasts only 5 to 10 minutes. So, while later elementary, it will last only 15 to 30 minutes. So, 20 to 30 selected response items. So, for secondary students, 30 to 50 minutes. So 30 to 50 selected response item, which it will represent that one item per 1 minute. So by middle of or in a high school class, the time often determine the maximum length of the assessment. So the care is needed to not end up with a speeded test. So the length you make your test should also depend on the purpose of your assessment. So formative assessments, which are designed to evaluate and correct student misconception while learning. So it should also be shorter so they can be more frequent and thus keep up with student progress more effectively. So meanwhile, summative assessment, which evaluate learning at the end of an instructional period. So it tend to be longer since they have summarized learning and are less frequent. So the bell ringers and exit or entry tickets might be a short 1 to 3 question long. So as they serve as a quick check for a comprehension. So finally, at the end of the year, assessment might be the greatest length of them all as they are often intended to evaluate student comprehension of concepts learned throughout the entire year or semester. So you can in some information you can have or you can read about types of assessment. So the data we look that is based on assessments so that were completed by 5 or more students. So overall, teachers seem to keep all assessment to an average of 11.4 questions for elementary and for 15.3 for middle and high schoolers. So there are so many factors to consider when you sit down to write an assessment for your class. So a familiar run of questions might pop up into your head. What types of questions do I include? What's the best way to word instructions? And perhaps sometimes one of the biggest and most difficult questions to answer is, how long do I make it the assessment? So when it comes to the test length, it's essential to find that sweet spot that accurately and fairly evaluates students' understanding without burdening students with too many questions. So there are important factors to consider for test length, which is the time. So of course, it is the most important to consider the time, because the best length for your test also depends on other factors besides just your class, grade, and subject. So the biggest factor to consider is the time constraint your students are under. So when students are under time pressure, they may make mistakes that have nothing to do with the extent of their learning. So therefore, it is important that you have a lot of time for an appropriate amount of time of your assessment. Thank you.